Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio at the intersection of comics, nerd media, and social change. This is your host, Elon 11, and this is the sort of nerd podcast that's always said, good isn't what you are, it's what you do, in the words of G. Willow Wilson's Ms.Marvel comic, which, oh, by the way, is the inspiration for the new Marvel TV series, Ms. Marvel, that we are going to be covering on today's episode. Ms. Marvel, aka Kamala Khan, was the first specifically Pakistani Muslim American superhero to get a big push from the publisher. The character, co-created by G. Willow Wilson, Adriana Alfona, and editors Stephen Wacker and Sana Amanat, was a huge moment in the cultural zeitgeist. You know, I'm a huge comics nerd. I'm always keeping track of new, interesting characters that are coming from different identities and always applauding them. But because this had a major push behind it coming from the publisher, people who I knew who don't normally follow comics or the superhero world heard about Ms. Marvel, and they all wanted to talk with me about it. Then when this TV show was announced, suddenly the world of people who were excited about it was even bigger. I really feel like the character creation herself, brought so much to the Marvel universe. And now having her be the star of a Marvel TV series is just giving her that much of a bigger platform, especially what with having actual like Muslim and Desi talent behind the camera, writing, et cetera, et cetera. So joining me, I have some absolutely amazing guests. First off is Dirakshan Raja. Dirakshan is Pakistani American organizer and Bhangra DJ. She is the founding executive director of Muslims for Just Futures, a grassroots organization that builds power in Muslim communities through collective care, organizing, advocacy, and movement building. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here and talk about Ms. Marvel.
How did you first hear about the character?
So I actually heard about the character when the comic books came out because, it was a cultural moment of particularly representation of a Pakistani Muslim teen in particularly a superhero genre. And the actual comic itself does touch upon these issues of Islamophobia, of bullying. And so I had heard about the comics first and known about the author, who was a Muslim woman, and then was really excited that it was going to be adapted into the MCU universe and like a Disney series. And so absolutely have loved watching it. I'm sad that it is over for now. Looking forward to seeing her in the Marvels. But yeah, really excited to talk more about Ms. Marvel.
Sweet. And joining me is Harini Marchati. Harini is a college student studying biology and history. She is particularly interested in questions of nationalism in formerly colonized nations and interactions between countries affected by colonialism. She also, by the way, is the person who we most consider to be the protagonist of the Cerebro podcast Discord. I don't know if she expected that I might say that, but it is true. She is our protagonist. Welcome to the show, Harini.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I was not expecting you to say that, so I just started giggling to myself as you read that out.
It's true.
But I'm so excited to be here and to talk about Ms. Marvel because she's one of my favorite characters, like in comics, in fiction. I just love her so much. So I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and we know each other from X-Men comics fandom, basically.
Yeah. We kind of connected through Cerebro, which is an amazing X-Men podcast. But I also really love Ms. Marvel as well.
Awesome. And my final guest is Sabiha Basrai. Sabiha is a graphic designer and social justice organizer living on occupied Ohlone territories of Oakland, California. She has been involved with economic justice, immigrant rights, and anti-war organizing since the mid-90s. For the past 16 years, she has been a co-owner of Design Action Collective, where she works at the intersection of visual arts and activism. Sabiha is a Muslim woman and daughter of Gujarati immigrants. She continues her work for immigrant rights as a member of the Alliance for South Asians Taking Action. Sabiha is also a member of the Center for Political Education's Advisory Board and part-time faculty member of the University of San Francisco's Department of Art and Architecture. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all.
Did you get into the character through the show, or were you following her from comics time?
Yes, like Dirakshan, I grabbed that comic book right off the shelf as soon as it came to my comic book store here. I'd also been a fan of Wilson's writing in the past. The novel Elise the Unseen is something I highly recommend for those who want to have more stories about jinns. But I think what particularly drew me to the Ms. Marvel storyline was how it felt like such a a complicated representation of the Muslim American experience in a way that I hadn't seen represented before.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to kick off the episode by giving folks a quick sort of spoiler-free look at why the show is great, because, you know, I feel like a lot of folks, there's a lot of excitement and hype for the show. And, people want to know, we've all seen the whole season. And so we're going to talk real quickly, like we're giving you our pitch for the show. And then we're going to get into the full on spoilers, nerding out section of the episode of the podcast. Dirakshan, what did you love about the show that you would tell people they should know to get folks excited to watch it?
Oh my God. I feel like I can say so many things here because I absolutely love the show, but I'll say 3 highlight points. I think 1, if you're looking for just a beautiful visual experience with some beautiful music from South Asia, from Pakistan, like if you're looking for that, you're going to get something very visually and sound-wise appealing. In terms of the story itself, you're going to be exposed to something that is very much a transnational story too, of someone who is 18, who was coming of age, of trying to find herself in Jersey City. But the story in particular show even goes deeper into her roots, thinking about the partition that happened within South Asia. And so it's just a real beautiful story, bringing some historical context into a superhero story. So I would say those are 2 of my kind of big pluses that I would say. And third, I just think in the span of a few episodes, they really went deep into a lot of themes. And so I think there's something there for not just Muslims and Desis, but actually for everybody, anybody who is part of that immigrant experience, there's a lot that will resonate with you. So those are my 3 highlights for Watch the Beautiful Show.
I mean, as a person whose family of refugee experience that is not Desi at all, I was completely like, oh my God, this reminds me of my grandma. And I cried so fucking much. So yeah, I think that for a lot of people, it'll resonate with those sorts of stories. Harini, you fellow comics nerd, I know some comics people are like, the show is different from the comics in some ways, and therefore we're like, tell me, like, what do we say to those who have said that is why they're not liking it?
So I understand where people are coming from, and when every adaptation there are changes you're not happy with, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that the core of the character and the core of who the people around her are has been maintained. And I think that's what we love from the comics the most is I consider her supporting cast to be one of the best supporting casts in any comic book I've ever read. And that energy is very much preserved in this show. And honestly, I would say it's enhanced because some of the characters that are in the comics I maybe don't like so much are done so much better in the show. So I think the powers, I understand people might not like the powers or people don't like this detail or that detail. They changed it from the comics. In the comics, it was like this. In the comics, it was like that. But I think the heart of the story has very much maintained has been the same. And I think Kamala as a character has been translated so beautifully to the screen. And I think the heart of who she is has been translated so beautifully. So I think if people are looking for the spirit of the comics and rather than just going off a checklist of well, this didn't happen in this order and this villain didn't come in at this time, they're going to be in for a really good experience in that sense.
Totally. Thank you. And Sabiha, what is your pitch for folks?
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate to what Dirakshan and Harini both said. What I would add is that, as an activist, as someone who that has been doing organizing work for a long time, which many folks listening may also relate to, it's really easy for me to get kind of stuck in reacting to the crisis right in front of my face. And it's much harder for me to imagine what it could feel like in my body and in my community when we win or when we solve something. And a show like this helps me keep a big imagination. It helps me play with the idea of a different way of being. So for those of us who are dealing with the kind of immediate crises, right, of the violence against Muslims in India right now, and the continued impact of surveillance of our communities in our mosques here in our own cities in the United States, that's painful, a reality for all of us. But this show gave me space to just imagine and be joyful. And I invite everyone to lean into that.
Thank you. That's so freaking real. We need it right now. So to our listeners who haven't seen the show yet, go watch the whole show, watch all 6 episodes. It's not a ton of content. You can do it. And then come on back and join us because from here on out, there'll be spoilers. Don't say I didn't warn you. So I will say one thing that the show did that I did not expect and that I absolutely loved was the decision to take the character to Pakistan with her mom and really, and like to bring in time travel to share her great grandmother's story. What an amazing decision. How do folks feel about like bringing the story into Pakistan and the way that part of her origin story was told with her family's history?
I really love the idea of like focusing so much on her heritage and like the connections between her family, because I think that's kind of where the show is at its strongest, is when it's focusing on Kamala's relationships with the people around her, like her family particularly, but also her friends in general. But I did feel like the pacing of the show was kind of harmed by the decision to go to Karachi for like 2 episodes and have this like time travel flashback. So I loved the content, but I just think in execution it didn't land for me as well, just because I would have liked if it had more room to breathe. But I kind of acknowledge that's a limitation of the setting. I like the format. I just kind of wish that we'd had more time for things to sink in. But I think it also ties to, and maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but that ties to me not being super enamored with the clandestine as villains. And so that I think was something where I was like, oh, I love this in theory, and it would have landed with me if we had more time, if it was done in a different way.
Gotcha. Sabiha, thoughts about bringing the story international with your family?
This was a exciting moment for me because I wasn't sure how they were going to kind of weave in this intergenerational story. And the scenes that were taking place in Pakistan, in Nani's apartment, the flat, and like the dusty cupboards full of just things, it made me miss my grandma so much. And I could almost smell the smells and feel like the visceral reactions of being able to go visit my, grandmothers and, great aunts and collect their stories in tangible ways. For people of my generation who are born in the early 80s, it was our grandmothers, not our great grandmothers who experienced partition. And so I kind of heard directly from one of my great aunts, like, what was it like in Mumbai in the 40s? And why did our family not move to Pakistan during that time? And so just being able to collect those stories as a source of power, for me, made a lot of sense that like Kamala's power was activated by this bracelet, which was like a passed down family heirloom. And like when I wear my grandma's old earrings, I feel connected to her stories. So I was so here for that part of the episodes.
It's really powerful. Dirakshan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, right before they go to Karachi, I think it's either at the end of the 3rd episode, you see the images of the partition when the last trains are leaving. And so in my family, my grandparents, like they were actually on on that last train from Jalandhar on India side, right when partition happened, and then made it to Pakistan. And so, these were oral histories passed on by our family of what partition did. And I just remember when I saw it in the MCU universe, right? Someone who follows it and watches it, I just had tears rolling down my eyes because I was like, this visual representation is going to sit in one of the most watched sort of universe of comics. And it actually sort of visualizes something that we were taught and told down. And then as the story progresses, and I do agree with Harini in that it felt a little bit rushed, but for me, the episodes that really delve into Karachi as a city, her discovering, her talking to her grandma, us going even back to the 40s. I mean, the way they even opened up some of that conversation of the British colonial rule and how people were resisting. And even though folks were resisting together, the tensions that were risen between Muslims and Hindus and these conflicts, and that erupted in that partition happening. The fact that they even went there, that we even saw the depiction, to me, and of course there's like very real critiques of some of the limitations of how the story was told, but for me to visually see that story as something that was given down by my grandma was very powerful. And the centering of women's experiences, the silence around the partition and the violence that specifically our grandmas and women went through in the partition is something that does not often get talked about. And in this particular storyline where her grandma is actually murdered, like, I think they were centering women's experiences of the partition in a way that I've also not seen before. So to me, though, that was really the highlight of Miss Marvel, and where I was actually, frankly, very surprised at that they even went that deep, not just mentioning it as here's a superpower source as her grandma, the partition happened, and then just totally glossing over it. But the fact that they even gave an entire 2 sort of episodes, or an episode where they're in Karachi, the city. And, you know, to me, I grew up in New York City around 9/11. And so that even the comparisons of Kamala being in Jersey City and then going back home to Karachi, which is another one of the global mega cities, like, it just opens up for me as an organizer, even conversations on a transnational level of how are things like state violence playing out? How is displacement playing out? Because some of this very similar kind of violence we see within the kind of Jersey City, New York City areas, also what Pakistanis are experiencing in Karachi right now. So I really just appreciated 2 cities being able to like visualize and see that. And then also that lineage of the partition, but particularly a centering of women during the partition and the violence that women went through.
That's so amazing. Yeah. Yeah. You brought up Jersey City, which is a good reminder. Like, the show had so much character and specificity to her time in Jersey City as well. And like, Jersey City is a place I've been to many times, although I have not lived there. But it was so cool to see that sort of community brought to light. Wanted to read in a letter from a listener that we got. That was from my fellow The Jewish Vote board member, Katie Unger, who wrote to me to say, there's 100 reasons she loved the show, but one of the big reasons is that it embraces collective popular action, online community, and fandom as a force for justice, when so much of the superhero stuff, like Batman's Bane, Occupy take being the worst, doesn't trust crowds to be anything but mobs. And yeah, I definitely think that is something special and valuable and exciting about the show. And I think one of the real strong points was being able to show the community coming together to also save Kamala and Kamran, and how the community of Jersey City was leveraged to be part of the heroing process itself, you know?
I'd actually love to talk a little bit more about this theme of the way violence is represented in this story. Because on one hand, I was really impressed with the way that the train station was presented to us during this crisis moment of partition. There's been so many other kind of cinematic representations of the train that have been just really, really violent and like horrifically violent. You know, trains arriving in stations where everybody's already dead. You know, just extremely graphic details. And I was really impressed that the anxiety, the fear, the chaos of that moment was captured without that kind of level of violent imagery. But I still felt like, oh God, my gosh, this moment. However, when we're back in Jersey City, there's like what feels like eternity of militarized police just hunting children at their own high school in their own neighborhood. And despite or maybe even because of people kind of rallying around outside, it even feels more gut-wrenching that kind of militarized police presence was somewhat normalized as like, this is just the way things are in America. And even at the end of the finale, when we kind of see people celebrating the existence of this superhero and sharing their like TikTok videos about, oh, I was there, I saw she fights so well. Nobody was really naming the just traumatic experience of having this level of just police unloading rounds of their weapons at children. And so that really, really stung and like left me wondering, like, what are we reckoning with when it comes to state violence, and what are we accepting as normal?
I mean, they let the local police force decide to be good guys, which was also like, I knew they were going to do that because Marvel wouldn't be allowed to otherwise. But, I mean, I was impressed at how much they allowed the government agency to be bad guys who the existing community there was already like, we're like, oh, you guys are here to racially profile us. Like, we've been here. And like, to just have that keep coming up repeatedly through the story whenever the government agency damage control shows up to profile and harass the mosque and stuff.
Oof, and damage control didn't even take their shoes off in the mosque.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate Sabiha mentioning that, because that was actually one of the difficult points for me to watch last night. As I was watching the finale. For me, the entire time I was thinking about, of course, this violence exists. We know that children and youth particularly have been targeted by the surveillance infrastructure and apparatus. I was also thinking about, they sort of showed partition and violence in the 1940s, but we know that as part of the war on terror, those drone strikes have killed babies, including in Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan, right? And so there was this piece where I was really struggling with about, we're talking about violence as something happened like decades ago, but right now, that same sort of origins of white supremacist colonial violence has still continued, albeit it's taking a different form via the war on terror. And we're seeing that manifested in Jersey City, in New York City. I mean, I grew up as a teen, as a youth. 9/11 happened when I was 13 years old. I know after that, like NYPD surveillance were right outside my neighborhood, in our schools, in our MSA when I was in CUNY at John Jay. And there was a little bit of romanticism in this last episode where they showed the community really defending each other and the cops sort of protect the community. Whereas in reality, actually, police fully collaborated with the militarized state to surveil. And a lot of that community has actually been uprooted and torn apart post 9/11, as people were heavily deported in New York City and Jersey City post 9/11. Actually, Pakistanis face some of the highest rates of deportations among South Asian communities. And so that's where I was sitting a little bit with the tension of like, this feels a little bit romanticized and also a bit whitewashing the role of police and the military. And also, I agree with Sabiha of like, these were babies, these are youth being like hunted in the streets of New York City and Jersey City. And it felt a little bit like it was glossed over.
Yeah.
So I just want to like disclaim that I am not Muslim. So I have a slightly different perspective on this just because like it's not something that impacts me so personally. But I do think that like they kind of, I don't know if they tried to have their cake and eat it too, but they tried to address the issue in the sense of like Nakia. I think in the last episode, when Bruno tries to flee to the mosque with Kamran to avoid damage control, she's like, you can't come here. It's a mosque in America. And so I think they're trying to kind of make that commentary, but then they kind of, stepped away at the last minute, because I think to fully examine the war on terror in America and to fully examine like the ways in which these forces that hunt, Muslim teenagers, which is ultimately what they were getting at, is like Muslim teenagers in America are hunted. But to fully acknowledge that, they would have to show that like, it's not just like, oh, the Department of Damage Control is bad. And like, even more than that, there's this scene where like, I can't remember her name, but the female Department of Damage Control person who's kind of been running this whole show gets a call from her boss. And he's like, why would you attack teenagers? You're making this look bad. You're fired. And I just thought that was like, oh, Marvel, like you have to just show it's like, oh, it's just the bad apple. So they kind of, they showed the issue. And I thought it was like a really, shockingly, I guess, true to life portrayal. Like the fact that they even kind of tried to go there. But then at the last minute, they were like, psych, it's not like a whole apparatus that's targeting Muslims in America. It's just like this one bad lady and all the people that she's in charge of. But like she got fired, so it's fine now. And like all the cops are on their side. And I was like, it just felt kind of wishy-washy, which again, I don't expect much from the MCU in terms of political commentary, but it's, I think, a little bit more disappointing that they like went there and then they like stepped back after the fact.
Yeah, that's always the question, right? Like going halfway or ignoring it, or corporate media, ladies and gentlemen. But what we did get from corporate media is we have this really wonderful superhero. Like, I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about Kamala as a character and how she relates to her parents and family and school, and her, like, I mean, a lot of the story is also about her trying to assert her independence and identity. I remember feeling after the first episode, like with her parents not wanting her to go to Avenger Con, and me just being like, Yeah, that's really unreasonable. You should let her go to AvengerCon. Good God. But, and I actually, at the end of the episode, I was like, do they want me to sympathize with her parents? Like, I don't, I grew to love her parents and like, you understand why they're acting that way. But so much of the show is about her trying to find her independence. Like, cause that's the teen superhero story. I'll start with you, Harini.
In the comics, Kamala is one of my favorite characters like ever. And I love that comic, the Jubilee Wilson run. And so I was kind of like, how are they going to handle this in the show? But then I turned on the show and immediately like Kamala is making like these goofy little YouTube videos that are like her making animated stories that are basically like fan fiction about the Avengers. She wants to go to cosplay conventions with her best friend, and she just felt so like human and lovable and amazing immediately. And I just loved that. And I also thought her dynamic with her parents was really fascinating. I'm younger than I think most of the people on this, all of the people on this call.
Yes, you are.
I'm 21, so I'm young. I still go home when I'm not in like my apartment. And so I have a lot of a closer recollection of like what it's like to have parents who are just constantly living in a state of anxiety about their children, and like they can't really do anything about it after a certain point, but they just like sit there and worry. And I think it kind of, for me, I felt that like her dynamic with her parents was one of the strongest parts of the show, just like because to me it felt like, oh, I can tell that like her parents love her and they care about her so much, but they just don't understand like the things that she wants and the things that she needs. And they are scared for her safety all the time. And some of that is conservatism, and some of that is like, this is literally like a foreign country to them. They have no idea how things work. Like everything here is kind of new and scary to them, no matter how long they've been here. And so I thought that relationship was just like really well done. And I liked, and I think it's part of a trend that we're seeing now, with movies like Turning Red and things like that, where like you show the conflict between, it's always an immigrant daughter and her mother. But to me, it's never like demonizing, right? Like I feel like in a lot of stories that I've seen beforehand, the solution is either like the Indian parents or like the Desi parents or like whatever parents, the immigrant parents are perfect and like there's no problems and like the story's about something else, or the parents are like really toxic and like they either, you leave them basically, or they like change into completely different people. And I thought it was really realistic and something that I really appreciated, that this show was like, no, her parents are always going to be a little bit strict and a little bit controlling in ways that she won't, not controlling in a bad way, but like a little bit more involved in her life than perhaps she would appreciate, but that it does actually come from a place of love. It's not like her parents are like a problem to be solved in the sense of like, like, oh, we have to Americanize her parents. We have to assimilate them so that like they understand that like how things are done here. It's like, no, her parents are always going to be like pretty firmly Pakistani and are going to raise her in that way. But they've come to an understanding about what she needs and they're like communicating and things like that. So it's not like they have to, because that is my problem a lot of times in stories like this, is that the solution is just for the parents to assimilate. And I think that's really sad. And I think that's a really bad solution for that kind of thing. So I appreciated that this story was like, it was a legitimate conflict between her and her parents, but the solution was not for her parents to like become American or to completely let go of like, being more traditional or more religious and having, that kind of thing. It was just more like, her parents need to learn that she's growing up and kind of step back a little bit, but they're not to be demonized, and she isn't supposed to abandon them, and she's not supposed to, think that they're like the scum of the earth or anything like that. So that was something that I really appreciated, because I think for a lot of people who are children of immigrants, you have very complicated relationships with your parents, or relationships with your parents where it's not like, you can't say like everything is 100% perfect. But at the same time, it's not like, oh, I want to like leave my family and do something completely different. So I appreciated that level of complexity without demonization, especially from her mom, which I think was more of a focus.
I think you nailed it on the head. Dirakshan?
I'll say, to me, it was also one of the strongest parts of the show. I think it really gets at the sort of relationship you end up having with your parents as a daughter in an immigrant household, where you love them, they love you, but you're essentially negotiating and figuring out boundaries. You're figuring out, you want to please them, but then you also are trying to figure out your independent identity and who you are. And I actually think that's going to resonate a lot with like they see girls, they see young women, they see teens, because that's a real dynamic within many of our communities of negotiating and navigating that. And one of the things I really loved about her, I mean, one, the character is like absolutely lovable and so natural and like really relatable. is also the ways I mentioned during the show. You see her relationship strengthening with her mother, her grandma, because of what she opens up. Also, her grandma and her mom's relationship strengthening. Her relationship with her father, her brother. Like they really, what I love about one of the things I love about Miss Marvel Kamala is like the relationships around her. It's like her friends, her family. Like they actually provide a much more in-depth kind of a storyline about her and how all those relationships also essentially protect and build her up, and how she negotiates all of them while trying to also maintain her own individual identity too. So I think for me, that was one of the like strongest parts of like the show, was essentially her negotiating, but also all of the lovely relationships she has around her and how she's trying to build them and navigate issues and conflicts and tensions that come up.
All of her supporting cast are all real, full, developed people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they like Bon Jovi, which is very important to me on a personal level. Sabiha, do you have any thoughts about Kamala Khan or the actress's performance? Or
Yeah, I really agree with everything Hari and Dirakshan said. I wanted to just add how helpful I found that particular negotiation around like navigating these kind of dual worlds of being like a second generation immigrant story. What was really helpful for me around that was kind of space to talk about patriarchy in Muslim society without demonizing Muslim men. Like we're adding fuel to the fire of the Islamophobes who have this narrative that I remember, sure all of us remember all too well, of just Muslim men being bad to their women, right? Forcing them to be subservient, like this kind of narrative that creates a kind of moral justification for military interventions in places like Afghanistan. And so for me, someone who I'm an only child and really close to both my mom and dad, and my feminist values very much came from both of them. And I also saw them both push back against traditions that were not in line with those feminist values for themselves. And they modeled for me what it could look like to change the kind of beliefs that one was raised with, not in an attempt to assimilate and perform whiteness in their kind of new country as immigrants, but as like really staying accountable to what mattered to them and what mattered to them about their culture and religion and relationship to family, and what mattered to them about, you know, how they wanted me to be able to grow up and thrive. So that really prepared me to kind of be able to continue to evolve my own political education and let go of whatever kind of cultural norms that were, you know, heterosexist and all of these kind of ingrained attitudes that so many of us have had to unlearn. And, you know, my parents didn't raise me on Bon Jovi, but they did raise me on Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. So much love to them.
Totally. And yeah, I mean, Nakia running for mosque board, it was such a wonderful little like subplot to have, and a great beat for her to have. I think she's such a wonderful character. Is there anybody from the supporting cast that each one of you guys wants to shout out, and why? And anyone, Harini?
Yeah, I'm gonna shout out Bruno, mostly because in the comics, I do not like him very much, and I don't like his relationship with Kamala very much, like in terms of like, oh, they should date. But I think they're just adorable in the TV show. I think they're just like cute little teenagers, and but Bruno in this show is just so amazing. You don't get to see him as much because like Kamala's in a different country for 2 episodes, but
yeah,
they just have such like a natural rapport to them. And I just thought he was just like a sweet character. And I also loved that he just like showed up to all their he showed up to Amir's wedding and like a salwar and everything. He's just part of they've just adopted him into the community. And I thought that was really cute as well. He was even part of the choreographed dance they did for the wedding. I liked the dynamic that he had with everyone in the family as well. I think that was important to fleshing out that like he's part of the community, is not just like he's Kamala's best friend and like everyone knows him, but like, you know, whenever he comes over, Kamala's mom is like, all right, I have 2 Tupperwares full of food. You're going to take them. No questions asked. You're leaving. Okay, great. And like he installs a security system at their house and, you know, all that stuff. So I thought it was just really well done. And he just felt really integrated into the community, which is a thing in general that I really love about the show, is that the community feels so alive. I can, point to like little things of like, oh, this person knows this person, all that kind of stuff. I just loved that it felt so lived in, I guess.
Yeah, totally. What about Dirakshan?
I mean, I loved a lot of folks. I think definitely Kia, the friend, I thought that there was a whole storyline there in terms of sort of community organizing. They used the whole entire Eid space that literally organized to run for the board of a masjid. And, they even gave a lot of nods to this idea of the side entrance, which Hind Makki ran a whole blog, and there's this entire internal sort of organizing and movement from Muslim women who are talking about the treatment of Muslim women in masjids and are organizing to change that, shift that. And so I really thought that was a really beautiful way to talk about an internal dynamic that is happening and a nod to some serious organizing that's been happening for a very, very long time. And to see that, like a little piece of that in the story, I think very parallel to the ways they're not demonizing her parents and she's figuring out her individual negotiation with her parents. There's also how are Muslim women figuring out a negotiation within the broader Muslim community, and the masjid becomes one of those places of institutions of power. And rather than demonizing the masjid, they're actually thinking about, well, how does Nakia is organizing and shifting and changing things up? And so I really, really love that.
Thank you. Sabiha?
Yeah, shout out to Nakia, definitely modeling the kind of agency that young women can have in a mosque. I wish I had seen this TV show when I was a teenager in my mosque, and thought about organizing with my friends about things that we could make better for all of us as part of that community. I'm also going to just name how cute Sheikh Abdullah is, and how just his very sweet moments. For me, he represents the kind of a religious leader who is definitely part of maintaining the status quo, and the status quo that's problematic in many ways, but isn't shutting new voices down, and is creating space in kind of the best spirit of being a leader. And so many of my friends from my generation in the mosque I grew up with have kind of moved away from the religion, from the community, from the kind of physical space. And I was lucky enough to have a leader in my community that I felt like really saw me in the way that Sheikh Abdullah sees Kamala. And I probably may have moved away from my relationship with Islam more so if it hadn't been for just knowing that there were people like him. And I still have a kind of complicated relationship with, like, how do I practice my faith? Like, what are the traditions and rituals that I find meaningful in my life today versus the things I just did because everyone around me was doing it. And so I just wanted to name Sheikh Abdullah as a character that kind of pulls me back to, like, well, how am I in my own mosque? And what are my expectations of the folks who are leaders?
That's really great. What are folks' thoughts about the whole setup between the red daggers and the clandestine and the jinn, and the sort of world building that the show developed that is really unique to it and new to the Marvel universe?
I honestly have really mixed feelings. Like I said earlier, this is probably the part of the show that I enjoyed the least. I'm just inherently, there's something in me that kind of reacts a little poorly to the idea of, like, Kamala's great grandmother is from another dimension. I think maybe it's just because, to me, my great grandmother is someone that I know very well because my father was practically raised by his grandmother in many ways, and so, or like she was like a second mother to him. I wasn't the hugest fan of it, and I think the clandestine were an interesting set of villains in theory again, but I just kind of felt that the pacing was a little rushed, and I think they could have been more interesting if they'd been allowed to be explored a little further, because, like, they're introduced in the same episode that they, like, try to kill Kamala at her brother's wedding for not, like, going along with her plans. So I came away kind of feeling a little bit mixed on that. And I don't know if it's because I don't like the concept in general or just because I didn't like the way it was presented because of how fast everything had to go. But yeah.
I mean, you raise an interesting point, which is like, what does it mean if you're saying that actually these specific Pakistani characters are from another dimension, like versus from Earth, like the ones with the power, the ones with superpowers are? I don't know. Any thoughts about that, Sabiha, Dirakshan?
Yeah, I agree with Harini about, I feel like I didn't understand their characters well. I wish we had a few more episodes in the mix here to kind of more wholly see them. And though I was on board with the idea of jinns and the way that the concept of jinns maps to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, when you think about the multiverse of madness or the gods of Asgard, like just what these kind of magical beings, things that we see as magic as humans on this earth, can kind of be explained by the idea of other dimensions and jinns that can cross over into our dimension. And I grew up with all kinds of superstitions about, like, you don't touch plants at night because there might be jinns like living in them and you don't want to bother them because they might come and mess with you. So I just have always had that kind of surrounding my back of my head about these unseen beings. So I was on board with the concept. I just wish that, as Haria mentioned, it wasn't so rushed. And I think that the kind of closing statement from Kamran, who was kind of like, "How could I be normal? How could someone accept me?" Was such a perfect setup for this very beautiful statement by Kamala, saying that there is no normal, there's just us and what we do with what we've been given. So if all of those pieces brought us to that point, I was here for it.
I'll say I definitely agree with both Harini and Sabiha. I think for me, I would have loved way more development on who are the clandestines, how is Aisha connected, what was her story. I just feel some of that was really really rushed. And then also the Red Daggers being in Karachi, like why is this part of the world where this is happening? I think that I was a little bit confused around that plot line. And also I do think at the end when Kamran is like, essentially, we're not clear what's going to happen, how he's going to be treated by the Red Daggers. Like that's kind of just like left up in the air. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe they were going to do a twist at the end and show something where it's like, maybe a cliffhanger. Because we don't know, right? The Red Daggers are supposed to be protecting the world. So I wasn't sure how that was all going to play out, also in the context of Karachi. And I think I just left with a lot of questions and was a little bit lost into where that storyline was going.
I thought it was cool that Kamala got to have 3 really interesting young men who were genuinely interested in her. Like, I don't know that, and that it wasn't done in a way that was like, you have to choose, or like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like part of being a young person making friends and exploring relationships with them, sort of.
Yeah, that was all very cute. I'm so here for teenage romance stories, and this one was done with such like genuine sweetness, and I really enjoyed that.
One of the things, again, I just really want to underscore is also the level of artists that were involved in the visual design and the music artists that were featured. I mean, in particularly this series, you get to hear from like the first ever Pakistani woman rapper. You get to hear like folks from Liadi. Like it's just even the visual, like the folks that did the visual designs. Mm-hmm. I just really felt like this was a beautiful cultural moment of the kind of art that we're seeing from South Asian artists in this moment, and even South Asian artists from like a diasporic and transnational context of like you had artists in Pakistan as well as you had like Pakistani South Asian American artists too. And so that is one of the things I really, really appreciated about this is like how many artists we actually got to see their work. And so, that's just one thing I wanted to underscore in terms of a part of the show that felt like a real cultural celebration.
Yeah, I feel like I got a lot of cool things to add to my playlist. And I loved the way the visuals, like they really used the fact this was a comic book TV show to be able as a visual narrative storytelling device. folks, that in the last episode when you have Kamala breaking everything down on the school board in the classroom for how they're essentially going to home alone their way to freedom, so they think and hope. Like it uses the comics medium in the TV show in really creative ways.
Yeah, thanks, Dirakshan, for just naming this the visual feast and musical feast that this series has been. I just wanted to take us back one more time to that scene at the train station and just appreciate what it meant to have Kamala literally brought back in time, like pulled back in time by her ancestor to the most traumatic moment, so that you can save your ancestors, so that you can exist. It's like the idea that we a lot of us have heard this quote: "We are our ancestors' wildest dreams."
Yeah,
and that concept clicked for me in this moment of kind of what does it look like for those of us who have this generational trauma or whole generational trauma around this particular story of partition and crossing oceans and immigration and kind of wanting to live up to what the hopes were of our parents and grandparents, but also to just like honor that they had their struggles in their time and we get to face ours, and we can do that because of strength that we got from them, not because we have to replicate specific aspects of their lives.
Totally.
I don't think there's anything in particular. I just was really, really, I mean, again, like I had my like quibbles and stuff, but I think overall the characters coming to life in this way, and the fact that we actually got a show that, and it's addressed like the surveillance state against Muslims in America and partition and all that kind of stuff, I think is really monumental. And I just wanted to say again that I really loved every character in this show a lot. And I really hope that that love is felt by everyone else who watched this show. I imagine it would be very hard to watch the show and not come away thinking that not only is Kamala an amazing character, but that Iman Vellani is like an absolute star, and she's amazing. I think she's going to do great things. And I just like can't wait to see what's next for her.
Oh, totally. I definitely think, though, that the show owes me the opportunity to hear Brown Jovi, which we were promised during the wedding sequence, and whom then we did not get to hear perform. So that is my demand for season 2, is a Brown Jovi performance from the Desi Bon Jovi cover band that was supposed to play at her brother's wedding. Do folks have specific things you really want to see in season 2? Or, I mean, she's next going to be in this movie with Captain Marvel, but hopefully we get to have some more of just stuff building into her world. Are there particular storylines from the comics or things that came up this go round that you'd like it to come back to?
Yes, I am looking forward to seeing some more character development amongst folks like Nakia, and just giving them more space to kind of grow. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the television show portrays Zoe and Nakia's friendship.
Yeah.
And like how what the dimensions are that are represented there as and how closely they're gonna kind of map to the comic book. But I really enjoyed Zoe's character development, given that she are introduced to her as kind of a mean girl, and already saw a lot of shifts. So yes, yeah. I'm looking forward to some of those characters kind of growing into more complexity.
Yeah, I was like, please, can we not have the Jewish character be anti-Muslim? I do not need that in my life. So hopefully they get a storyline not entirely different from what we have from the comics, which would also bring some necessary queerness to the screen.
Yes.
Dirakshan, what do you want to see next season?
Yeah, I think for me next season, I would really love to see her community in Jersey City that be further developed into how they really anchor her and how that's sort of her launching pad into the world. I also would love to see how does she maintain this relationship with Karachi and like Pakistan with Jersey City? Like, how does that all develop and grow? And I'm also looking forward to seeing her relationship with her mom. I thought it was really beautiful that her mom made her the Ms.Marvel like costume, which is like kind of a play on a shalwar kameez and a dupatta. I really thought that was interesting, and so I'm really excited to see how they're going to further develop that.
Can you tell us more what that is? What that is?
Yeah, so shalwar kameez is essentially it's pants and a longer shirt and a dupatta. I mean, it's worn a lot in Pakistan, but I would say all across South Asia. But it's a real kind of like traditional dress for a lot of Pakistanis who wear that.
Yeah, that was an interesting shift from the comics, right? Because in the comics, she makes her own costume out of a burkini, as she calls it, and like a scarf, and like it's like very much her creation. And in the show, the entire outfit is her mom's creation.
Right.
Yeah. So it struck me as like having the whole costume be her mom's creation in the show is like it felt like a huge difference, especially like in so many superhero stories where the parents don't want them to be heroes and it's this big source of conflict. And it's a parallel versus the costume that she made for her daughter to be Incredible Hulk, which was like her mom trying to connect with her and actually getting it exactly wrong, you know?
I also just find it really interesting that the costume is like based on a shalwar kameez and a dupatta like that. That to me, I'm like, oh wow, because the burkini was very specific to trying to being like for Muslim women to be modest and going out into beaches and swimming. But I just found it interesting that this was rooted in specifically shalwar kameez. The reason I just mention that is because often I think in the storylines we see the assimilation into Western clothing and Western dressing, and to give up your saris and your shalwar kameez and your dupattas and all that. But in this context, it's like bringing that along, not totally dropping it. And so I found that to be really interesting in terms of not just the relationship, but also the dress and bringing that with you as a part of your identity.
That's really powerful. Harini.
I think I kind of want to echo what both of you guys said, Sabiha and Dirakshan, is that I just love to see more of her relationships with the people around her, because that was like unquestionably the strongest part of the show. I would love to see more about how her relationship with her parents is changed now that like there's still this tension of we want to protect you and we're scared of like every time you're out of our sight, we're like scared for what you're doing, but also you have superpowers and we know you're a superhero and we're really proud of you and we want you to go save the world, but like you also have to be home by dinner. I think that's like a really interesting dynamic and I'm excited to see more of that. And I would like more connections to her cultural heritage and everything. And based on kind of the way this season ended, with the Red Dagger and everything kind of being set up as a continuing plotline in Karachi, I think we're probably going to get more back and forth and, globetrotting, but I would also love to just have some time to breathe and focus in Jersey City as well and really develop that community there, because I think that was a really amazing aspect of the show as well. And I also want to agree about how I love that her costume is based on her like cultural heritage. Like even the bangle, which gives her the powers, is like something that you would wear as part of like, you would put on like your shalwar kameez and your dupatta, and then you would put on the bangles. So I just wanted to say that I loved that aspect as well. So just more of what we got pretty much is what I want.
You made me think of something about the relationship with her parents, which is that Marvel doesn't have a Spider-Man anymore whose major concern is, what historically Spider-Man, has had the Aunt May tension and stuff like that and taking care of his family. And he's lost that. And Kamala Khan is very much a Spider-Man, right? Like she is a Spider-Man type. And has, filled that teenage hero with relatable, normal kid, like challenges that, Spider-Man had played prior to her. So I think them giving her that stuff with her family to deal with is filling what would have been a hole in the lineup, so to speak. But I also like, if they try to like mush her into like the Iron Man Avengers industrial complex, I would be disappointed because I think it would probably squash out some of the ability to have the individuality and character. And, Tony Stark is dead, but I just really want her to tell him to go fuck himself, which she wouldn't. She's a sweet person, but I don't know. Any thoughts about the relationship with this in the broader MCU stories to come? folks?
I just wanted to echo something that you said about the relationship to Iron Man. So one of my concerns when the show initially started in the MCU universe was the role of particularly Iron Man being a defense contractor and him literally building his empire based on war and murder. And so I was really concerned that they might have, if they didn't go down that line in this one, of like essentially making her part of that military industrial complex. And I think a lot of Avengers often fold into, in the mainstream of the films that we have seen, into the national security space. And so I do agree with you. I think if that they went in that direction, it would really be disappointing for me to see the storyline. I hope they don't, but that to me would feel like really a departure from like her essence and what has made her like character actually quite powerful.
And also, I just want to add in, I can't believe we didn't talk about the X-Men thing once, like the fact that she's a mutant.
Yeah.
I think that could be a whole other conversation, but I do agree that I don't really want her to get swept up into all these big crossovers. I think it's because I have MCU fatigue in general.
Yeah.
But I would love if she just kind of, maybe she pops in for a movie every now and then. What I want is like teenage superhero shenanigans, just her in Jersey City or with her family in Karachi, just, doing teenage superhero stuff, necessarily getting involved with like, I don't know, King the Conqueror or whoever the next big crossover villain is going to be, which I, again, don't have that much interest in. So
let's talk about the whole mutant thing. I don't even know how I feel about it, so I'm very happy to outsource having an opinion to you guys.
I kind of thought all along that this is what they were going to do as soon as they announced Ms.Marvel, because I was like, all right, the MCU Inhumans are nothing. They tried and they failed. They're probably more nothing than they were in the comics. So, but I didn't really think that it was actually going to happen. And honestly, I don't think I have an opinion on like her being a mutant versus an Inhuman in terms of like, oh, like I'm mad that they like changed it. I know some people are. I don't really care as long as it doesn't affect her story. I think like personally the spot I'm at right now is like, I don't really care if she's a mutant or an Inhuman, like where her powers come from. I would just prefer if she remained her own character rather than like going to Xavier's school or wounding up on Krakoa or whatever they end up doing with the X-Men in the MCU. I kind of want her to stay isolated and not to be kind of folded into the X-Men, because I think it'd be really easy for her to get lost there. She's such an amazing character, but the X-Men are probably like, they're the most valuable property that Marvel had, which is why they sold the X-Men in the 90s when they went bankrupt, like the rights and stuff. So I think I would prefer if, this is just like a hint of, oh, the mutants like came from another dimension or something, or like the mutants are in the MCU. Don't worry, we're working on it. Like this is a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the fans. And then we just don't make her like the Kitty Pryde of the X-Men, because I think that would be like a really terrible decision to do that. So I want her to be a mutant. I don't really care if she is a mutant or an Inhuman or not. But I just want her to stay separate from X-Men stuff in the MCU. Although the fact that she's not an Inhuman means that we won't be seeing Lockjaw, which is a tragedy in my opinion, but oh well.
You do bring something up that's like really appropriate, which is, she's not the first Muslim American superhero, right? There were others and they were in the X-Men, and because they were just in the X-Men, they got lost in the shuffle. Nobody ever gave them a solo push and no one had ever heard of them, right? Like that's why when I did my intro, I stipulated specifically Pakistani American superhero who got like, a big solo push, right? So yeah, it's true. Like, if she was just another X-Men, then she ends up like Monet, who like we love, but is niche as hell, So Sabiha.
Yeah, I appreciate the feeling protective of this character and this storyline as its own thing, and how crossovers can be fun, but also we run the risk of the stories losing their cohesion. X-Men was kind of my introduction to the Marvel universe as a kid, and I really related and appreciated this theme of oppression and like state repression that the X-Men characters had to deal with. And even in the movies, I remember when the first X-Men movie came out, I think I was still in high school, and this approach to like, what does it mean to do resistance work? What's possible. And so those themes, those kind of social justice themes, really are what has kept me connected to Marvel stories. And so there's for me, it tracks that, like, okay, if there's kind of an element of like, what does Ms. Marvel do with kind of an identity as a mutant or as an inhuman, and how does that relate to like what we know about these other characters in the universe of Marvel, as they relate to like their own identities, who they are, what's in their TNA, and like how they're seen by the state, and what their role is and what their responsibilities are with the powers that they have. So I'm very curious. I did see, there was plenty of signaling to like, even, I think, what did I catch this correctly, that the logo of the 10 rings was in the temple where Nejma and Kamala's great grandmother were like discovering the bangle. Like there's some signaling already. And that's why I'm excited about the kind of the mystical, magical part of the universe being where Ms. Marvel stays, and there are these kind of other veins of the universe maybe don't pull her in. And too, I'm looking forward to all of it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I want Ms. Marvel to give us the kind of personal fuel to continue to do this work and keep our eyes on like the campaigns we're trying to win.
That's great. So tell our listeners where they can keep up with your work on the internet, Dirakshan.
You could find me on Twitter at my handle at Dirakshan Raja. You can also find me on Instagram, where I also share a lot of my cultural work, including my DJing at DJ Kiran, Kiran.
I love it. Thank you so much. And where can folks keep up with you online?
I'm on Twitter at Harini Marchati, just my full name. On Instagram, I believe under the same tag. I didn't really have any work to promote, so I just would encourage you guys to go check out Sabiha and Dirakshan's work, because I'm sure it's amazing.
Love it. Love it. Sabiha.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation, y'all. I do really hope that Ms. Marvel stays in the magical realm of the MCU and not the Iron Man, Tony Stark realm. And for me, I just also want to close with like naming that as much as I just have had so much joy watching this TV show and felt so seen, I also know that representation is not enough, right? Like we're not doing our organizing work so we can have a Muslim superhero. We're doing our organizing work so we can stop the surveillance of our communities and end these kind of military occupations of our homelands. So what I would like to lift up is our organizations that are actively working on campaigns to end violence against Muslims in India, to address fascist governments and oppression, and do solidarity work here in the United States amongst diaspora communities. So I would recommend folks that check out Desi's Rising Up and Moving. Check out Abolitionist Futures, Muslim Abolitionist Futures, Equality Labs, Alliance of South Asians Taking Action. There's also a DC-based org called South Asian Americans Leading Together that can coordinate Desi organizing around the country as part of a coalition of South Asian organizing projects. So hopefully we can include some of this in the show notes.
Absolutely. Links to everyone would be great. Well, thank you again so much for joining me. This has been such a pleasure. And to our listeners, we are going to, I don't know the order things will come out. So if our Thor 4 episode hasn't come out by the time you're listening to it, don't worry. That's what's coming out next. There's going to be more amazing coverage of comics, news, and art, and interviews coming in the near future, as well as a new episode of Deep Space Dive, where we will be talking about the mirror universe episodes of Deep Space Nine. So I am on Twitter a little bit too much at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Ilana_Brooklyn. And you are welcome to give me questions, feedback, etc. over there. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.